Chapter 2, Digital Media and Political Engagement Worldwide. This really takes us off with our case studies, but in particular, we're starting off with countries that our three models were based off of. Those 17 Western democratic countries, that's where we're starting off here. And in particular, this chapter, we're looking at specifically the US and the UK only. Okay, it's important to always remember that in these chapters. What are the countries we're focusing on? And this chapter is a nice breezeway to get into more of the quantitative analysis, which we have coming up in the next chapter, because it's more theoretical. It's asking us, when do we think the internet is good for democracy in the US and the UK? That's our main question for this chapter. When is the internet good for democracy? It's not something we regularly think about as far as a question in our mind. We just assume the internet's good. So our authors have a theory that the internet is good in so much that within your information infrastructure, you have the principles of granularity, informational exuberance, and byproduct learning installed within your internet usage. Outside of that, questionable, but you have to have those three things. So for us, that begs the question, well, what do these three things mean? And that's what we're going to jump into right away. And then we'll come back to this question about when the internet is good for democracy or not. Before we jump into what is granularity, informational exuberance, and byproduct learning, the authors bring up another point that we want to address real quick. And it's the difference between Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. And is that difference really a big thing? We've sort of discussed this in our last meeting. The difference between traditional media and digital media was the direction of the flow of information. Traditional media was from content creator to consumer. It's almost exactly the same thing here with Web 1.0 versus Web 2.0. Web 1.0, when the internet just came out, it was very much content creator to consumer. We internet users just consumed the content that was put out there. Originally, the New York Times, its online edition, was a scanned copy of the physical newspaper just put on there as JPEGs, as pictures. So you'd go to newyorktimes.com and you'd click the next button and it would flip the page for you. Completely different than the platform that they have today. And at that time, you couldn't comment on the newspaper, right? You could just read it. That was most of the internet at that time. Now it slowly started changing into what it is today. Web 2.0, which is multi-directional flows of information from content creator to content consumer to then that consumer becomes a creator. Now it doesn't mean that all internet users are content creators. Some people are just still consumers. They still use the internet as Web 1.0. And what we'll see is some places around the world, it still is very much like that. So it's real important going into our major three concepts for the chapter that we understand in the US and in the UK, the chapter focus, we are focusing on Web 2.0. Now, what is granularity? Let's go over our simple definition first and then break it down a little bit so we know exactly what we're talking about. Granularity is the extent to which the creation of informational public goods may be disaggregated into tasks of varying magnitudes, where magnitude is understood as function of resources, time, knowledge, experience, all of that together, which people are able to mobilize in the pursuit of individual and collective goals. All right, so what does that mean? Well, there's a few keywords we need to know what they mean in that definition to be able to understand this word. First is informational public good. Those of you who've taken political science courses before, you should know what a public good is. A public good is a piece of policy that's created, legislated. Once it is made, it offers something to the public, a good, that once put out there, the use of it cannot be restricted. Let's say a new road. Once you make a new road, you can't restrict anyone from using it. Everyone can use it, no matter if they contributed to it or not. Clean air, clean drinking water. These are public goods. An informational public good would just be information that you cannot restrict access to. Let's say the contents of a library. A public library is filled with informational public goods. All right? Now here what we're talking about is informational public goods being created by different people. Generally speaking, public goods are created by, because remember, public goods, public policy made by government. Here, the idea of granularity is the notion that public goods can be created by private citizens coming together with their different expertise, their time, and their knowledge. So what would be an example of this today? An informational public good that people come together to make, that is online, that you can't restrict access to, in the US and the UK at least? Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a source of great amounts of information that lots of people come together to build upon. And the organization itself does a lot of fact checking to make sure any article that is up there is accurate. All right, so that's what we're talking about here first. So for the internet to be good, you need granularity. You need people coming together to build informational public goods away from government doing it. Now, rather than going into the strict definition of informational exuberance, I find it easier to just tell you why is it different than granularity. Informational exuberance takes the idea of granularity and breaks it down to non-elites. So informational public goods being created by non-elites. And why would that not be Wikipedia? Because although a couple of you might know Wikipedia content creators, and while I might know a couple, the fact is very, very few people actually know anyone who contributes to Wikipedia. Wikipedia, generally speaking, is created by elites of different fields. Different academic elites, different scientific elites, different government elites, different private corporation elites. But Wikipedia, for the most part, is people who rarely know what they're talking about, putting stuff up there. And then the organization fact checks it, and if it's someone doesn't know what they're talking about, they get rid of it. So informational exuberance is like that, but non-elites. So what kind of content is created out there that everyone uses, that's not elite driven? YouTube. YouTube is a great example. You can find a wealth of informational public goods on YouTube that is put out there by non-elites. You know, for an example, whenever starting out my podcast and whenever starting out making lecture videos, I YouTubed a lot of different things to find out a good camera, a good microphone. I didn't need to go to an elite source to find out that information. I could just go to some average person on YouTube, and if their quality of their video was good, the quality of their sound was good, I would take their advice. So YouTube is about putting informational public goods out there by regular citizens for the creation of everyone. So once again, democracy and the internet go hand in hand when, in this case, the people are participating in the creation of informational public goods. Now the last piece of our puzzle for when is the internet good for democracy in the US and the UK? Byproduct learning. What is it? Byproduct learning is the idea that any individual goes on to the internet for any reason, non-political generally speaking in this case, and while they are surfing the web, they come up against some advertisement, some pop-up that gives them a little snippet of information, in our case, political information. They learn something from that advert. Then perhaps it sparks something for them to Google a little bit more about it. Byproduct learning is accidentally running into something online that then incentivizes the individual to look into it further. Okay? It's a pretty simple notion, but one of the big conversations we're going to have throughout the rest of the semester is simply, does byproduct learning still exist in the internet? Some people argue yes. Yes, it totally does. You cannot get around it on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, that it is constantly there. You run into advertisements. Other people, they will tell you byproduct learning doesn't exist, depending on which rabbit hole you go into. If you go into gaming far enough, if you know how to cut off access of logarithms, getting access to your cache information, your location, your IP addresses, there are ways that you can steer clear of byproduct learning. For most people who aren't that tech savvy, though, byproduct learning still does exist. So we're going to see real quick how you mash this up together with our other two principles to make the internet good for democracy. So let's pull our theory back out of the chapter and see whether we buy or sell this idea. So, the theory: innovation in democratic practices is more likely when you have the principles of granularity, informational exuberance, and byproduct learning embedded in your political communication network. Innovation in democratic practices simply means new forms of political participation. So here we're saying that the internet is good for democracy in the US and the UK, remember that, if elites in our society get together to make informational public goods for everyone that is non-governmental in source, if the people, we the people, also get together and make informational public goods for society, once again, non-governmental sources, and then if byproduct learning exists, that in the process, while everyone is out there surfing the web in the US and the UK, we, by some chance, get exposed to political information, and it spurts us on our way to being more interested in politics. If all three of those things happen, if society engages in these ways in the internet, then our authors argue the internet is good for democracy in the US and the UK. What do you think? It's a pretty big question. No. Have we seen, do we have evidence to suggest that the internet has made the US more democratic, has made the UK more democratic, or better as a democracy? These are very important questions that we really haven't faced yet, that we'll definitely be talking about in the forums. The authors point out one other very important thing after they put their theory forward, and it has to do with the evolution of the internet and where we are and where we've been. So as much as we've changed from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, the authors tell us point blank, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, as they are now, as the internet is now, those things could change. And they could change into something very, very different that would affect how the internet affects democracy in our country and in the UK. And one of the big things that they talk about, well, they don't mention MySpace, but I'm going to mention MySpace. MySpace used to be bigger than Facebook, especially since it was public when Facebook was only university kids. So then MySpace was completely different. You had this wonderful platform, you do your own background, your top 10, top 20 list for friends, you had music playing, you had a counter to see how many people viewed your page. It was amazing. No one would have thought that Facebook would have come out of being university only to be public for the whole US, then to be one of the dominant social media platforms in the world. No one would have thought Twitter, when it started off with only a few characters, basically a headline of how you feel or what you were thinking, to be the way that the President of the US addresses the public with a tweet. YouTube, very, very early on, was not full of kitten videos and everything else. YouTube was very basic, and a lot of it was videos dealing with directly how to do technical stuff on the internet, kind of stuff most people don't even look up anymore. The idea is that in a digital media book, in a book talking about the internet, you always want to give room for evolution. And technology evolves very quickly, which makes it even more difficult to pinpoint trends in digital media going forward, which is going to be another one of the big things we'll talk about in the forums as well. Can we, and how accurately can we predict how digital media and politics will interact in the future?